Hey, friend, and welcome. This is the first module of a 5-module mini course on Jane Grey and the succession crisis of 1553. One thing you might not know is patrons and YouTube members of this channel, depending on what level you're at, get free monthly mini audio courses like this as one of the kind of thank yous for their support. So if you want to listen to the full course, you can become a patron, or you can also search for it wherever you get audiobooks, or even some libraries have it. So you might check it out. It is available as an audiobook that you can check out and listen to. So Audible, Scribd, any of the audiobook places, you should be able to check it out. But please enjoy part 1, which sets the stage for the succession crisis of 1553. And again, to listen to the entire course, you can either become a patron or a YouTube member at patreon.com/EnglandCast, or just click join this channel. Or you can get the entire course as an audiobook individually wherever you get audiobooks. All right, thank you so much and enjoy. Hello, friend, and welcome to this mini audio course on Jane Grey and the succession crisis of 1553. I am so glad you're here. In this first module, we are going to talk about the succession crisis, about Henry VI's declining health, and his device for the succession. So let's hop right in. In 1553, England stood at a critical crossroads. King Edward VI, the only son of Henry VIII, was on his throne, and his reign had been marked by significant Protestant reforms. The Tudor dynasty, relatively new and fraught with previous succession issues, placed immense importance on a clear line of inheritance to prevent instability. Succession in Tudor politics wasn't just about bloodlines, but also about the religious and political future of the nation. Edward VI's impending death at the young age of 15 thrust the kingdom into uncertainty. With no direct male heirs and 2 half-sisters, Mary and Elizabeth, whose legitimacy had been legally disputed, the question of who would ascend to the throne became pivotal. This crisis had the potential to undo the religious and political work of Edward's reign, making the succession not just a matter of lineage, but of national direction. So early in 1553, Edward began exhibiting alarming health issues. He suffered from a persistent cough, fever, and significant weight loss, symptoms consistent with tuberculosis, then referred to as consumption. Despite hopes that his youth might aid his recovery, his condition worsened rapidly. Contemporary physicians were baffled, and treatments proved ineffective. The severity of his illness at such a young age underscored the fragility of the Tudor succession and heightened the sense of impending crisis. The king's deteriorating health sent shockwaves through the court and the government. The Privy Council grew anxious, realizing that Edward's death without a clear, uncontested successor could lead to a power vacuum. This anxiety was compounded by fears of potential civil unrest or foreign intervention. The council, predominantly Protestant, was particularly concerned about the possibility of Mary, a staunch Catholic, ascending to the throne and reversing their reforms. The urgency to devise a succession plan that would maintain their religious and political interests became paramount. Edward VI was deeply committed to the Protestant cause, having been educated by leading reformist scholars. Aware of his declining health, he grew increasingly worried that his half-sister Mary would undo the Protestant advancements of his reign. Historical documents, including his journal entries and correspondences, reveal a young king grappling with mortality and the heavy burden of securing his religious legacy. Edward took an active role in discussions about the succession, demonstrating a determination to influence the future of England, even as his own future waned. As Edward's health declined, his concern for the future of England intensified. He was determined to ensure that the religious reforms implemented during his reign would not be reversed. Allowing Mary to ascend to the throne threatened not only the Protestant establishment, but also the advisors and nobles who had supported his reforms. Believing it his sovereign right to determine the succession, Edward took it upon himself to alter the line of inheritance. He saw it as his duty to protect the realm from what he perceived as the dangers of Catholicism. Edward's education and upbringing had instilled in him a strong sense of royal prerogative. He was convinced that as king he held the authority to override previous succession acts if it meant safeguarding the nation's religious and political future. Historical records indicate that Edward was actively involved in drafting the new succession plan, known as the Device for the Succession. His personal annotations and revisions on the document demonstrate his engagement with the process. Edward's commitment to this cause was so profound that he continued to work on the device even as his health was failing rapidly. The initial draft of the Device for the Succession reflected Edward's intent to bypass both of his half-sisters. He first designated the crown to the, quote, heirs male of Frances Grey, the Duchess of Suffolk, and his cousin. This choice was strategic. Frances was the daughter of Mary Tudor, Henry VIII's younger sister, providing a legitimate royal connection. By specifying heirs male, Edward aimed to continue the male lineage and maintain that stability. However, a significant complication arose in that Frances Grey had no sons, only daughters, Lady Jane Grey being the eldest. As Edward's health deteriorated and the likelihood of him surviving to see any potential male heirs born diminished, the device was revised. The absence of a male successor forced Edward to amend the document to name Lady Jane Grey directly as his heir. This alteration was a bold move. Naming a female successor was unconventional and risky, especially given the existing disputes over the legitimacy of female rulers. Nonetheless, Edward proceeded, underscoring his desperation to prevent Mary from inheriting the throne. The revised device explicitly stated that Lady Jane Grey and her heirs male were to succeed him, effectively positioning Jane as the next monarch. The Device for the Succession directly contravened the Third Succession Act of 1543, which had been enacted by Parliament under Henry VIII. This act reinstated both Mary and Elizabeth to the line of succession after their earlier disinheritance, albeit after Edward and any of his potential heirs. By attempting to override this statute, Edward faced significant legal obstacles. One of the primary challenges was the question of his authority to alter the succession without parliamentary approval. Under English law, the monarchy could not unilaterally change succession laws established by Parliament. Edward's decision to proceed without seeking parliamentary consent cast doubt on the legality of the device. Also, the lack of time and his failing health made it impossible to summon Parliament to legitimize the changes. The legal ambiguity of the device created uncertainty among the nobility and the Privy Council. Many were wary of supporting a succession plan that might be deemed illegitimate, potentially exposing them to charges of treason. There were also concerns about the public's acceptance of Lady Jane Grey as queen, given Mary's stronger claim under the existing law and her popularity in certain factions. Despite these challenges, Edward and his close advisor, particularly the Duke of Northumberland, pressed forward. They coerced key members of the nobility and the council to sign the device, binding them to support Jane's succession. This move was fraught with risk, as it relied on the assumption that their collective influence would be sufficient to suppress any opposition. The legal and parliamentary issues surrounding the device for the succession set the stage for the impending conflict. By sidestepping established laws and protocols, Edward and his supporters not only undermined the legitimacy of their cause, but also galvanized those loyal to Mary. The contentious nature of the device would prove to be a critical factor in the events that unfolded following Edward's death. Now let's talk about the influence of Northumberland. After the fall of the Duke of Somerset in 1549, John Dudley, the Earl of Warwick, emerged as a dominant figure in the English court. By 1550, he had been appointed Lord President of the Council and was later elevated to the Duke of Northumberland. Northumberland was a shrewd politician and an astute military leader, having suppressed Kett's rebellion. Northumberland skillfully positioned himself as an indispensable figure to the young King Edward. He presented himself not merely as a protector, but also a mentor who could guide Edward through the intricacies of governance. By aligning himself closely with the king's Protestant convictions, Northumberland secured Edward's trust. He promoted policies that advanced the Reformation, reinforcing their shared religious agenda. This alignment was crucial as it allowed Northumberland to influence the king's decisions, especially regarding the succession. Through his administrative reforms, Northumberland restored a measure of stability to England after the turmoil of Somerset's protectorate. He implemented economic policies to address the debasement of the currency, and he sought to improve the kingdom's finances. His efforts to strengthen England internally increased his standing with Edward and the council, further consolidating his power. Northumberland's ability to present himself as both a capable administrator and a loyal servant of the crown made him a central figure in the unfolding succession crisis. Recognizing the importance of securing his position, Northumberland engaged in strategic alliances to fortify his influence over the succession. In May 1553, he orchestrated the marriage of his youngest son, Guilford Dudley, to Lady Jane Grey. As we already discussed, Jane was the granddaughter of Mary Tudor, Henry VIII's younger sister, and had a legitimate claim to the throne. This union was more than a matrimonial alliance. It was a calculated move to place his family at the heart of the royal succession. By aligning his son with Jane, Northumberland positioned himself as the potential father-in-law to the next monarch. This marriage solidified his influence and provided a direct link to the throne. He also arranged marriages between other key noble families and his own, creating a network of allies bound by both blood and shared interests. Northumberland also secured key positions within the government for his own supporters. He appointed loyalists to the Privy Council and other significant offices, ensuring that decision-making bodies were sympathetic to his plans. These appointments extended his reach and allowed him to control the flow of information and advice reaching the king. His political maneuvering was not limited to domestic affairs. Northumberland maintained correspondence with foreign powers, gauging the reactions to potential changes in the English succession. By presenting a facade of stability and continuity, he aimed to prevent foreign interference during the delicate transition of power. Understanding Edward's deep commitment to Protestantism, Northumberland emphasized the existential threat that Mary posed to the religious reforms established during Edward's reign. He presented Mary's potential accession as a reversal of all of the progress made, warning that her Catholic beliefs would lead to the persecution of Protestants and the undoing of the Reformation. Northumberland may have overstated the level of support for Lady Jane Grey's succession to strengthen his argument. He assured Edward that the nobility and the common people favored maintaining Protestant leadership and would back Jane as queen. By highlighting all of this supposed widespread support, he alleviated any doubts Edward might have about the feasibility of bypassing Mary and Elizabeth. Historical accounts suggest that Northumberland leveraged Edward's sense of duty towards the Protestant faith. He framed the device for the succession not just as a political necessity, but as a moral imperative, convincing the king that naming Jane as his successor was the only way to preserve their shared religious vision. Northumberland secured Edward's commitment to the plan. However, there is evidence to suggest that Northumberland's portrayal of support was optimistic at best. Many nobles were hesitant about defying the established line of succession, and the general populace held Mary in high regard as the daughter of Henry VIII. By downplaying these challenges, Northumberland pushed forward a strategy that rested on uncertain foundations. Despite the uncertainties, Edward, influenced by Northumberland's counsel and his own convictions, remained resolute in altering the succession. Northumberland's persuasive efforts were instrumental in this decision, demonstrating his significant influence over the young king. His ability to steer Edward towards endorsing Lady Jane Grey set the stage for the ensuing conflict and highlighted the pivotal role that he played in the succession crisis. A critical component of the device for the succession was the deliberate exclusion of Edward's half-sisters, Mary and Elizabeth. The legal justification for the exclusion hinged on the complex marital history of their father. Mary was the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, whose marriage to Henry was annulled on the grounds that she had been previously married to Henry's brother Arthur. This annulment rendered Mary illegitimate in the eyes of those who supported Edward's device. Similarly, Elizabeth was the daughter of Anne Boleyn, whose marriage to Henry was annulled shortly before her execution on charges of adultery, incest, and treason. The annulment retroactively invalidated their marriage, casting doubt on Elizabeth's legitimacy. By citing these annulments, proponents of the device argued that both Mary and Elizabeth had no lawful claim to the throne. This legal reasoning was used to bolster the case for Lady Jane Grey's succession. But it's important to note that the Third Succession Act had reinstated both Mary and Elizabeth to the line of succession, despite questions about their legitimacy. Excluding Mary from the succession had profound religious implications. As a devout Catholic, her ascending to the throne threatened to reverse the Protestant reforms that had been established. For the Protestant faction, preventing a Catholic monarch from ascending was imperative to preserving their religious and political influence. However, bypassing Mary and Elizabeth risked alienating significant factions within England who were loyal to Henry VIII's will and the established Succession Act. Many viewed the legal reinstatement of Mary and Elizabeth as a definitive resolution to earlier disputes over their legitimacy. Ignoring this could be seen as a direct challenge to Henry's authority and the parliamentary statutes that had confirmed their rights. The exclusion also raised concerns about the stability of the realm. Overlooking the king's daughters in favor of a more distant relative was unprecedented and could be perceived as an overreach of royal prerogative. This move had the potential to divide the nobility and provoke public dissent, factors that would prove critical in the events that followed. The unveiling of the device for the succession elicited mixed reactions among the English nobility. Some were coerced into supporting the plan, pressured by Northumberland's influence and the presence of royal authority. They signed the document, swearing oaths to uphold Lady Jane Grey's claim, often out of fear for their own positions or under threat of being labeled traitors. Conversely, many harbored private doubts about the legality and the prudence of bypassing Mary and Elizabeth. They were acutely aware of the potential repercussions of defying the established line of succession. The prospect of civil unrest or being on the losing side of a power struggle weighed heavily on their decisions. This internal conflict among the nobility set the stage for shifting loyalties when the time came to act on their oaths. Among the general populace, awareness of the succession plan was minimal due to the secrecy with which it was conducted. The device was crafted and signed behind closed doors, and efforts were made to keep its details concealed until Edward's death. However, rumors began to circulate as unusual activities at court sparked curiosity and concern. Underlying tensions started to surface as whispers spread about the potential exclusion of Mary. The public held Mary in high regard as the daughter of Henry and associated her with the legitimacy of the Tudor line. Any attempt to alter the succession was likely to meet with skepticism or outright opposition from the common people who valued the traditional hereditary system. The declining health of Edward plunged England into a succession crisis that challenged legal norms and tested the loyalties of the realm's most powerful figures. The ambitious maneuvers of the Duke of Northumberland, coupled with Edward's determination to secure a Protestant future, set the stage for a conflict that would shake the foundations of the Tudor dynasty. As we move into Module 2, we will explore the reluctant rise of Lady Jane Grey to the throne. Despite her own reservations, she became a central figure in this period. Simultaneously, Mary Tudor prepares to challenge the altered succession, rallying support to assert her rightful claim. Thank you so much for being here, and we will be back in Module 2. See you then.
Blow, northern wind, a scent for me sweating. Blow,